Morning, everyone, and welcome to Hope Unitarian Church. I'm Christy Emig, the project organizer for Action, and I'm honored to be your guest speaker this week. Anita Mills will light the chalice and lead us in an opening prayer.
And in lieu of physically lighting a chalice, we ask you to imagine a flame in a chalice. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we shared together. Here's the prayer I offer this morning. O Spirit of compassion into our hearts, we pray, be with us in the hard hours. Help us to be kind this day. O Spirit of unity, help us enter into the pain of our neighbors. Let us walk where they walk, that we might speak a gentle word along the way. O Spirit of love, enlarge our sympathies toward all troubled folk. Let us be generous of heart, that we might forgive and be forgiven. O Spirit of thanksgiving, let us be grateful for hands that serve, for those who give and for those who receive. O Spirit of life, let us walk together in our weakness, that by treading the path together, we may be made strong. O Spirit of the spheres, help us to face the mystery of being. Secure us in the larger patterns we can trust, and bless us this holy day. Let it be so.
Thank you, Anita. And now our opening hymn is number 300. I'll leave the words here for just a minute and then move us into the virtual version, the virtual hymn. But I especially want to lift up the words here. A firm commitment to the goal of justice, freedom, peace for all. And now here's Anita with our reading.
The reading this morning is from the 7 Principles in Word and Worship and the chapter on the second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Emily Gage says, compassion is something that we can easily act on individually. We can demonstrate openness, give people respect, and treat people with kindness on their own. But we need one another to achieve equity and justice. If we learn to walk in one another's shoes, if we see each other as real people, we act compassionately. And when that becomes true, we are motivated to work for justice and equity. It is also true that when we change laws, we help people change their attitudes as well. This is not something we can do alone. It is something that becomes more and more powerful as we gain in numbers. Justice, equity, and compassion are all part of the same package.
Thank you, Anita. I'm thankful to be with you all this morning. If you are like me, worshiping together as a UU is an opportunity to reset, recharge, and hopefully hear something that inspires you for the week ahead. I was invited to be here because of my work with Action, so let me introduce myself with a brief story of how I became an emerging organizer. I'm a proud Okie, born into families that have been here for generations. My Okiness is the core of my story, and after years of being embarrassed to be from Oklahoma, I am now embracing my roots. The Worst of Hard Times by Timothy Egan tells the story of a dozen families and their communities as they struggle through years of blinding black dust blizzards and repeated crop failure. He describes the state this way: it was a lost world then, it is a lost world now. The government treats it like throwaway land, the place where Indians were betrayed, where Japanese Americans were forced into internment camps during World War II, where German POWs were imprisoned. The only growth industries now are pigs and prisons. The stories in that book and this description make me wonder if perhaps the Okies who stayed deep down inside feel that we are throwaway people in a throwaway land who don't deserve more than we have, but keep getting up day after day to try to do better. According to Egan, despite the fact that more than 250,000 people fled the Dust Bowl, 2/3 of the population never left. I am now embracing my roots. I come from those people who stayed and farmed cotton and peanuts and persevered through the Dust Bowl. So I must also get up each day to work hard to do better. The spirit of my story comes from my religious traditions that I followed, that follow the call for social justice, Disciples of Christ and Unitarian Universalism. But the heart of my story comes from my education. I attended a racially diverse preschool and attended the magnet schools beginning in the 3rd grade in 1976 when Emerson Elementary was integrated through the graduation from BTW in 1986. The magnet school program began in 1972 as Tulsa's much delayed compliance to the 1954 Supreme Court decision to integrate public schools and the 1968 U.S. Justice Department suit against Tulsa public schools to force a plan for desegregation. I know it sounds cliche, but those years literally changed my life. I became a teacher because of the amazing role models I had along the way. Mrs. Nelson, Mr. Woodard, Mrs. Gromberg, Senora Stevens, and Mr. Moutre, just to name a few. But I was also changed forever. When I heard parents of an opposing soccer team call my best friend and teammate the N-word and watched her get punched in the post-game handshake line. As our country collectively grapples with racism and privilege, I have to acknowledge that, as upset as I was that night, I was able to drive home to South Tulsa and not worry about the color of my skin. I have to acknowledge that most of my teachers were white, that we didn't talk about race, and that by attending Booker T as a white person, a Black student was denied the quality education I received. About half the Black students in the school's attendance zone were displaced and bused across town to traditionally white high schools. This legacy haunts me and drives me to want to organize for change in my city. It seems more of an honor than usual to be in front of a group of people who decided to get up, get dressed, and Zoom on a Sunday morning. These are such strange times, aren't they? We may lose track of what day it is, attend a meeting in our pajama bottoms, or go for weeks or months without leaving the house or seeing others in person. These times may have provided extra time to spend with family, garden, complete a project, or reflect on priorities. But we as a society are also facing the economic challenges of decreased local tax revenue, high unemployment, a loss of retirement investments, and mass evictions. Adding to the economic and mental stresses that we've all felt at some level because of the virus is the social unrest our country is experiencing as history of systemic racism. As I mentioned before, I attend UU services to recharge and find inspiration. So I hope to offer some ideas to challenge you to think about what can be done in these strange and turbulent times to create a better future for our community. I suggest that it will require political action, and that's where organizing comes in. As many of you know, HOPE is a member of Allied Communities of Tulsa Inspiring Our Neighborhoods, or ACTION, a coalition of 17 congregations, nonprofits, and a school, with the vision of an engaged, equitable community where all people have power to influence public decisions. According to the UUA publication, A Social Justice Approach to Revitalizing Congregational Life, congregation-based community organizing is an effective way to fulfill our mandate to work for a better world consistent with UU values, principles, and theology. We have strongly affirmed, as one of our principles, a faith and a belief in democracy, both within our denomination and in our society at large. According to the UUA, 50 other congregations, Unitarian congregations, are also members of organizations like ACTION in the Industrial Areas Foundation network across the country. ACTION builds the power necessary to influence public decisions and hold our elected officials accountable by identifying and developing leaders in our member institutions who are ready to take action. The relationships we build within our institutions and with elected officials allow us to respond to the pressures our members are currently facing. The stories we've heard over the past several months about school support staff who weren't going to be paid when schools were ordered closed, people not getting tested for COVID-19 because they couldn't afford it, immigrants not getting accurate information about the virus, health and safety recommendations, and financial support, and an upcoming tsunami of eviction filings highlight the cracks in our system that have been amplified by the pandemic. ACTION leaders have been organizing to repair those cracks with something more permanent than Band-Aids and duct tape. I recently read several chapters of Hope Within History by Walter Brueggemann. In the first chapter, he describes the process of transformation using 3 dimensions: the critique of ideology, the public processing of pain, and the release of new social imagination. He teaches those dimensions using the biblical story of the Exodus, a time when Hebrews were living as immigrants in Egypt, enslaved by a pharaoh who treated them harshly and inhumanely. Brueggemann suggests that it's only when they start to tell their stories and cry out against the oppression and their oppression and pain that they can reimagine a better future where they are free. That's when they find the courage to leave. He believes that transformations take place in these wrenching transitions. I would argue that because of the pandemic and the civil unrest, we are living in our own wrenching transition that should push us to move from protests that identify and call out the injustice of Tulsa's criminal justice system to meaningful political action that will lead to a better future. Brueggemann writes that the critique of ideology occurs when citizens engage in social criticism of the established power and don't accept it as proper or normative or deserving of respect if it is organized against justice, freedom, and humaneness. Let's look at 2 examples from citizens in Tulsa criticizing ideology or critiquing it. ACTION leaders held a citywide meeting in March and a statewide meeting in June to provide a critique of the court process in Tulsa that encourages an average of 100 eviction summons a month to be filed as a cheap and easy rent collection method. We will no longer accept or respect the established power system that benefits out-of-state landlords and their attorneys and provides few protections to tenants. Last year, another group of organizers from North Tulsa held public meetings to critique the criminal justice system in Tulsa using the findings from the Equality Indicators report issued by the Community Service Council. That report finds that in Tulsa, Blacks are arrested over twice as often as whites and are 50% more likely to experience use of force as whites. We will no longer accept or respect a racially biased criminal justice system. Brueggemann then describes the public processing of pain as an intentional expression of grievance. He says that the moment of outcry is a moment of going public in an irreversible act of civil disobedience, which declares that a group is no longer going to conform to the system. The outcry itself is a public act. Returning to our examples from Tulsa. During Action's eviction meetings, tenants cried out about living with mice, mold, and without heat, and about their fear of being evicted. We heard from one woman who cares for her elderly mother and young granddaughter who live with her and was fired from a restaurant when it closed in April because of COVID, that her landlord filed an eviction the second month she was late paying rent. The organizers in North Tulsa led protests in our city streets recently as a public processing of the pain of racism that has led to violence, racial discrimination, and inequity. They called out the names of unarmed Black citizens who have been killed by police over the past several years, including Terrence Crutcher. Finally, Brueggemann suggests that the public outcry and processing of pain leads to a release of new social imagination. He asserts that the cry takes the lid off our hope-filled imagination. It is the political act when citizens imagine an alternative reality. The group has a new ability, courage, and will to hope, imagine, design, and implement alternative scenarios of how it could be. They discover a new way to shape the community, to publicly articulate another way of reality, to form a new political entity which provides standing ground for rejecting the old political realities. Back to our Tulsa examples. Action has an eviction issue team that is imagining an alternative reality for tenants in Tulsa. A change to the Landlord-Tenant Act and the creation of a tenant association would balance the power and provide more protections for tenants. A local ordinance could require that landlords use the early settlement mediation program before filing an eviction to settle disputes about necessary repairs, work out a payment plan, or provide time for the tenants to find a new place to live. On June 1st, that North Tulsa organizing group met with the mayor and negotiated the end of the city's contract with Live PD, the development of a police oversight process, and allocation of additional funding for mental health services in Tulsa. These negotiations were a political act designed to reject the old realities and shape an alternative way to police in our community. Brueggemann asks, what will you do in your time? I'm asking, how can you help transform our city? What alternative reality do you want to help create? Are you ready to move from protests to organizing? A quote from Hawk Newsom, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter of Greater New York, in an article, Young Organizers Led New York's Protests, Now They're Taking Charge of Policy Change, by NBC's Phil McLaughlin, suggests that leaders of today's protests are ready. He says, so now that the whole world is marching, it is our opportunity and our obligation to give them a plan, to give them demands. In an essay written during the Civil Rights Movement, From Protest to Politics, The Future of the Civil Rights Movement by Bayard Rustin, he argued for the need to mold a political movement out of sit-ins and freedom rides and the March on Washington. He suggests that African Americans were no longer satisfied with integrating lunch counters. They now sought advances in employment, housing, school integration, police protection, and so forth. He believed that the way to meet these needs was through political power. He recounts that Southern demonstrators had recognized that the most effective way to strike at the police brutality they suffered was by getting rid of the local sheriff, and that meant political action. So if you are ready to move from protest to organizing, help us build political power by bringing 10 people to our accountability session in early August. An accountability session is an organizing tool used to hold our elected officials accountable for the decisions they make that impact our lives. We'll invite the candidates running for mayor and city council to respond to questions related to the pressures Tulsans are facing. You'll have an opportunity to compare responses to questions related to economic pressures caused by COVID-19 to those of businessmen Craig Immel and Ty Walker, or the responses to questions about pressures caused by policing methods given by North Tulsa organizer Greg Robinson and the owner of the Black Wall Street Gallery, Rico Wright, compared to those given by the mayor. You'll also learn how candidates for city council respond to supporting proposed ordinances that address health, economic, and safety pressures faced by Tulsans. Action doesn't endorse candidates, but those attending the event will record the answers given on a scorecard to be used as a voting guide on August 25th. Those answers will help you decide who can best lead our city through the economic and health crisis and racial strife we are experiencing. Here's your chance to take political action by bringing power to an event that asks our elected officials to commit to working with us on an agenda that reimagines a better future for all Tulsans. I hope to see each of you, plus 10 of your friends, at our Zoom event in early August. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to visit with you this morning. Thank you so much. Sorry, playing around with technology is always a challenge. So it's time for our offering. As part of Hope's outreach mission, the money collected during the offering is given away. The generosity recipient for July is the Community Food Bank of Eastern Oklahoma. Each week, the Community Food Bank of Eastern Oklahoma provides more than 464,000 meals for hungry Oklahomans. If you would like to put some money in the virtual collection plate today, there are a couple of ways to do it. You can donate online at hopeuu.org/generosity, or mail a check to Hope Unitarian Church, 8432 South Sheridan Road, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74133. Please write generosity in the memo line. Please join me in saying the words of our offertory response. We build on foundations we did not lay. We warm ourselves at fires we did not light. We sit in the shade of trees we did not plant. We drink from wells we did not dig. We profit from persons we did not know. We are ever bound in community. And now for our closing hymn. And now Anita will lead us in our chalice extinguishing.
That chalice we lit in our minds and in our imagination at the beginning of the service, we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
And here's our benediction.
Okay. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. May it be so.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hope to see everyone next week.
Thank you, Christy.